All righty. I do have a drink here. I hope that's okay.
Oh, perfectly okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bruno Galan talk show. I have with me today Nathan Dodge, who is a writer and has basically a very interesting story to tell about how that whole thing happened, the writing. So, hello, Nathan. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Bruno, how are you doing this evening?
Oh, pretty good. All comfy. You asked me if, yes, before the recording, you asked me, like, is it okay how I'm dressed? And as you were asking me that, I had this Ninja Turtle t-shirt and a bathrobe on top. And I was like, yes, Nathan, you look classier than me right now. Want to tell us a little bit about your story, because you sent me, and basically what happened is I contacted Kevin J. Anderson, and he just told me that Wordfire has this like staple of writers, and that he sent out the word to whoever wanted to come on my show. And you reached out to me, and you had a it was really nice because your email, you were telling me about yourself, and it was kind of like this very interesting story. And do you want to share a little bit like what your background is before you started writing and how you got to that, basically?
Well, I took a circuitous route to get to writing science fiction. The funny thing is that I've always wanted to be a writer my whole life. And as a matter of fact, I wrote a lot of multi-hundred page novels when I was 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. All really terrible, just terrible. But they were, I just loved the idea of being a writer, and I was determined I was going to be one. Well, it turns out that I've always been good at math and science, and when I was in high school, I took a lot of math. Matter of fact, I took one of the first calculus courses they offered in high school, and so I got a scholarship to SMU, got my engineering degree at SMU, went to work. By the way, the scholarship was sponsored by Bell Helicopter, which has a big plant here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And so when I got my degree, they offered me a job. So I went to work in flight test for Bell Helicopter, and I was there a couple of years. But one day I saw a sign on the bulletin board about getting, you could apply for a National Science Foundation scholarship to get a master's degree at the University of Texas. So I said, wow, that sounds neat. So I applied and I got one right off and talked to my boss, and he said that was a good idea. So I went down to, and I was married by that time. My wife and I moved down to UT, and took me about 2 years, got my master's degree, and my supervising professor I was working for, we got along pretty well. And he said, I got plenty of money. If you want to go ahead and get your PhD, I can, I've got the money. So I said, well, okay. Well, Bell Helicopter was not thrilled about that. Okay. So they said, well, we can't let you stay down there 3 more years. And so they terminated me, and said, we're just going to have to call off the contract. And I said, fine. And so I stayed another 3 years and got my PhD, and went to work for General Dynamics in Fort Worth, which had a big electronics laboratory. Stayed there a short time and ended up at Texas Instruments. I'm sure you've heard of TI. They're a big electronics chip company. And I stayed with them for about 25 years. But I was a little upset with TI because they sold a computer business, and I was a computer guy. And so I took early retirement and got a job at the University of Texas at Dallas teaching electrical engineering courses, and stayed there for a couple of decades. But always in the back of my mind, there was this dream to write. And I wanted, naturally, since I am a classic nerd, okay, what I wanted to do was write science fiction novels. Well, while I was at UTD, I got a chance to go to a thing called the Superstars Writing Seminars, which I'm sure you've heard of, which was a conference that Kevin J. Anderson started. And so I went to the first one about, I guess it's been 10 years ago. And it was in Las Vegas. And I just had a wonderful time, met a lot of writers, and that just cemented all my desire to write. So I started writing seriously.
So just to, sorry to interrupt, but just because you thought I might know, but I actually don't know about it. So if you want to give a bit more context, what is it exactly? Yes.
All right. The Superstars Writing Seminar is it's a conference which happens typically in early February. I'm going to the conference next Tuesday, as a matter of fact. And it was founded by a group of very prominent science fiction writers: Kevin J. Anderson, his wife, Rebecca Mesta, Eric Flint, David Farland, who you may have heard of, and Brandon Sanderson, who's probably the premier fantasist in the world today. Of course, you probably heard that David Farland passed away a couple of weeks ago. If you didn't know, you didn't know that he died very recently. He died of a stroke, and he was going to be there. I was planning. As a matter of fact, I traded emails with David the day before he died, and I said, I'm planning to see you there, and he said, well, I'll see you. And lo and behold, he passed away the next day, and he wasn't very old. He was in his early to mid 60s. He wasn't that old. But anyway, I started writing seriously, and I've been to 9 of these seminar conferences. I did not go to the one last year because the one that was planned last year was called off. Yeah. But so we're having our first conference in 2 years next week, and I met a lot of great writers. I met Kevin, who is he's as nice as he seems to be, believe it or not. David Farland was equally nice, and so is Eric Flint. Rebecca Mesta is just a lovely person. All of them are wonderful people. It's astounding that they're so well known, and yet they're nice people. But I started writing more seriously, and David Farland, who actually, his name is David Wolverton, but he's always written under the name Farland, and David became my mentor. I paid him to edit. He edited several of my books. And so finally, I started writing a young adult science fiction series called Shadow Warriors.
Yes, and I have actually today started listening to it. I got it on Audible.
Well, yeah.
I started listening, and I was hoping to I've been so busy, and I was hoping to have a bit more time to listen to more of it, to be able to talk about it more. But I've barely gotten started.
That was the first book I sold, and at that time, do you know the author David Butler? Are you familiar with Dave?
The name really rings a bell right now.
Yeah. Well, Dave's becoming quite a well-known writer, but back in those days, he was already selling books, but he was acquisitions editor for Wordfire Press, for Kevin Anderson's Wordfire Press. And so I sent him the first Shadow Warriors book and said, I really like this book. I think it's a pretty good book. David Farland has helped me in the editing. And I said, I think this is one of the worst things I've written, and I think is publishable. Tell me what you think. And I didn't expect him to. Well, about 2 days later, I got an email from Kevin saying, hey, we like your book. We want to buy it. And so that was how I sold my first book. And that was in 2017. Since then, I've written 4 more in that series. And then I've started a new Shadow Warrior series, and I sold them the first book late last year, and it'll be out sometime late this year. So I have 6 Shadow Warrior books. I also wrote a single standalone young adult novel called The Freedom Conspiracy, which they also bought. And then, in the meantime, I told you I keep going to these conferences. Let me say one more thing about these conferences.
Yes, please.
They're not craft conferences in general. Now, they do have a craft day, but they're not conferences on how to be a better writer. Okay. What their conferences on is how to make money and make a business out of writing.
Okay.
So I got to know Eric Flint pretty well, and year before last, 19, the last one of these we had, I was sitting. I had lunch with Eric and a lady who is actually one of the editors for Kevin, and we were talking about things. And I said, I've got this novel that I wrote quite a while back, and I've never sold it. I actually wrote it years before Shadow Warriors, and I said, David Farland's helped me edit it, and I said I'm pretty proud of it, and it's the first of a trilogy. would you mind looking at it? I don't know if you'd be interested, but just tell me what you think of it. And I said, also, I've entered this. You're familiar with Writers of the Future contest, I assume, right?
No, neither. You're catching me off guard with a lot of information that I'm going to have to delve deep into.
Writers of the Future is a contest that's sponsored by the estate of the writer that wrote Battlefield Earth. Do you remember that?
Oh my God, yeah. The one who started religion, right?
Yeah.
Wow. Wait, just a moment. How can I not remember this guy? Hubbard.
Yeah.
L. Ron Hubbard. Yes.
L. Ron Hubbard. You're right. Anyway, I had entered several. I've entered several. I probably sent them a bunch of stories, and I got honorable mention, and finally I got silver honorable mention, and finally 2 quarters I was a finalist, which means out of 1,200 to 2,000 stories, you had one of the top 8 stories. I've never managed to win a prize, but I have had 2 finalists. So I told Eric, I said, I've rewritten this story a little bit that was a finalist, and I think it's publishable. Would you take a look at it? I'd be glad to. So, I don't know if you know it or not, but Eric, in addition to being having his own publishing press, which is called, incidentally, if you don't know, Ring of Fire Press. So I'm the only author, I think, in the Western Hemisphere, both of whose publishers have fire in the title. Okay. but anyway, he also publishes a science fiction magazine called the Grantville Gazette. And the genesis of that title is too long to go into here, but it's a great science fiction magazine. Anyway, I said, I wondered if you'd be interested in this, because most of his Grantville Gazette stories have to do with this universe he created when he wrote the novel 1632.
So it's a shared universe.
Yeah, but
he
also takes just regular science fiction stories too. He said, "Sure, I'll look at it." He called me back about a week later and said, basically, I'll buy the novel and I'll buy the story too. So the name of this story. And I love Eric because Eric started out, I don't know if you know this or not, but he started out as a machinist. And he was also the president, I think, of the Machinists Union at one point.
Interesting.
And he's just a down and dirty, everyday guy. If you'd ever talked to him, you would love him. Anyway, he says, I called this book The Long Winter. Okay. And it's set in a dystopian future about 3,000 years down the pike. And he wrote me this great email, and he said, quote, "Your titles really suck."
What?
And I wrote him back, I said, "Eric, I'll tell you what, you write it, you bought it from me, you call it whatever you want to." And so he entitled it, there's a phenomenon in this book that happens, it's called a hellhole. That opens, and people think it goes to hell. In fact, it goes into another universe. Mm-hmm. And he said, "Okay, we're going to call it the Portals of Hell." So so the second one, I suggested this one. This was a 3-novel trilogy. So I said, "Why don't you call the second one the Portals of Spring?" And so he said, "That's good. I like that." So he called it that. And then the last one we call the Portals of Summer, because the story is about this Earth 3,000 years in the future. It's like Fairbanks, Alaska on a bad day. Okay. It's like the area in central United States gets down to like 70 below zero in the wintertime. And so as the story progresses, the Earth starts to warm back up. And so that's why we named it. Well, he liked that. Okay. And so he bought those from me. He bought another trilogy from me called the Subway Series, about these scientists that figure out how to connect a wormhole between 2 points in space. The first one was called Subway in the Sky, and that's probably the one I'm proudest of. I think that's one of the best books I've ever written. And so Subway in the Sky came out, I don't know, about June of last year, July.
And those are not sorry, those are not young adult. Those are big. I think,
those are
right?
adult. As a matter of fact,
because Shadow Warriors is young adult, but
yeah,
the ones you're telling me now, those are adult.
Those are adult. You're right. Thank you for pointing that out. And it's kind of funny.
It sounded like it, so I wasn't sure. I wanted to ask you.
Right. I have never sold Wordfire Press, Kevin's company. I've never sold them an adult novel. I've sold them 7 young adult novels. I have never sold.
But they're all in the same series, right? For Wordfire, it's all Shadow Warriors,
which is a standalone, right? And
the Freedom Conspiracy.
One called the Freedom Conspiracy is actually a standalone.
Okay.
But then I've sold 7 novels to Eric's Ring of Fire Press. I've never sold him a young adult novel. They're all adult novels. So the 3 Portals novels, and now Subway in the Sky, and the second one, Subway to the Stars, just came out, and I just turned in to their chief editor, Walt Boyes. I don't know if you know Walt or not, but Walt Boyes, it's called Subway to the Universe, and I just turned it in. It'll probably be out sometime later this year. And you know, these smaller publishers like Wordfire and Ring of Fire, they don't take 3 years to get a book out like some of these big publishers do. They move fast, and we authors really appreciate that because, you know, oh, are you there? Oh, there you are.
Yes, I am.
Some of these big publishers can take 3 years to get a book out, and so it's really nice to sell a book to the. And the thing about Ring of Fire and Wordfire is they're smaller, they're mid-size really, but they're highly respected. And so you can sell them a book and know it within a year it'll be out, and that's really something, you know. Anyway, I've now sold 14 books. I've started a prequel trilogy to the Subway series called the Wormhole Series, and I'm about half through with the first book. And then that I decided to go way out. I have a relative who is transgender, and I have I had a very dear friend and teaching assistant at UT Dallas who was transgender. So I started when I started this new Shadow Warrior series, it has all new characters because it happens about 20 years later than the original series. And so I decided to have a transgender character. And I've just sold the first one, like I said, to Wordfire, and it'll be out in the fall sometime. But it has a transgender. I was really concerned to get it right. So are you familiar, or have you heard the name Toby Santorelli?
No, I haven't.
Toby works part-time for Wordfire Press. Toby is a transgender sensitivity reader.
Okay.
And boy, I paid him some pretty good money to read that and help me. And I went through very carefully because I want to make sure that my treatment of the transgender characters is sympathetic and yet realistic about the way they really are. And Toby, I think, was real pleased with my character. So I'm going to be interested when that book comes out. That's the first book in the new Shadow Warrior series. I hope when that comes out that I will have some people that will appreciate that I've tried to really show some sensitivity and some sympathy toward people that have really had a pretty hard time in this society.
Oh yes, oh yeah.
I had some long talks with this TA, and frankly, it was depressing sometimes because I think transgender people are like gay and lesbian people in some cases, and that society just doesn't treat them very good so far.
Let me tell you something. Many years ago, and that's back when I was still going out before I was married and all that, so I would still go out for drinks and all that. And one time I went out with a transgender friend, a transgender woman, and she had another friend who also was a transgender woman. So they met up, and so I was walking with them.
Yes.
And it was really interesting because, I mean, I cannot even conceive what life is like for them, but
me
on many levels. But I got a glimpse. What I mean by that, I got a glimpse, is that you know, I'm not an imposing man, but I'm also not like a meek looking man, you know. Like, so I'm like, I guess normal guy, you know.
Yeah.
I'm not very tall, but I'm average size, so it's like, no, you know, if I walk around at night and people have been drinking, I don't look like the easiest target, nor do I think that I project that vibe.
Yeah.
And yet, what was interesting was that walking that night, and I'm very good at reading body language, and you know, I've trained in combat sports, and I've been in some tussles, you know,
Yeah.
like in my youth, and so I'm pretty good at reading when someone wants to start some trouble.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean they're going to do it, but when they kind of like feel cocky about themselves or stuff like that, you know. And what I realized that night, just going out with two friends who were transgender women, is that people are looking at them, and even at me by association, like I was like an easy target.
Yeah.
It was interesting because
you must be transgender too, right?
well, I don't think they thought I was too, but they must have thought I was. What happens too is kind of interesting, is that a lot of can I swear in your presence? Or I'm going to say a lot of jerks, because you told me you're a church-going man, so I don't want to swear too much in front of you.
Let me.
Yeah.
I'm church-going, but on the other hand, I've been out in the world for a while. Okay.
Yeah. Oh well, sure you have. But a lot of jerks seem to think that anyone who will associate with transgender people have to be meek and weak. You know, it's kind of like their way of viewing the world. That's really twisted. Which I don't think I am, but it's like they were looking and they would kind of have like this arrogant smile as they're passing by, and I was like, this is really weird. It's the first time ever that just by walking, it looked like people were looking down on me and thinking I was weak somehow or a viable target. And I was like, this is really interesting because never has this happened to me before. It can, I mean, I would recognize that more if someone who was really big and thought that made them tough started some crap, and then I would stand up to them. And at first, before things started and they realize how life works, I could see that they're cocky. And so that's where I would recognize that in those very specific moments. But I had like very normal looking people, man, looking at me that way, like, look at this wuss, I guess, or whatever. And it was really interesting. Like, and I guess maybe they thought I was gay just because I was with them, you know, like,
yeah.
And,
It
was a glimpse. Yeah. It was just this glimpse at like how stressful life is when you just go out at night for drinks and you realize the inherent danger of just being out. And you know, like, it was just like this eye-opening moment for me, because you can hear about stuff, and then you and for me it's like just a glimpse of it. I have no idea what's like day to day, you know.
Yes.
Yeah. So definitely it's we're not there yet as a society where we should be, you know.
Yeah. Next week, it's really funny because when I started working with Toby Sandarelli, who is a sensitivity reader, in other words, he has primed himself to make sure that transgender people are treated correctly in literature. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, he was recommended to me by Kevin. And so I just discovered the other day that he now works for Kevin part-time, and he's going to be at the conference. So I'm going to get to meet Toby. So I'm really tickled about that. Toby is a really good. Unfortunately, you know, I was really looking forward to meeting Dave Farland, of course, and Dave passed. So, and we're going to have a memorial service for him while we're there.
Nice.
But also, two of my favorite people in the world besides Kevin are Dave Farland and Eric Flint. Well, guess what? Eric Flint's been real sick with a staph infection, and so sick they had to put him in the hospital. Now he's getting better. That's good.
Staph is no joke.
Yeah,
staph is no joke.
You can kill you. It can kill you real easily.
Oh, no, I know because like again, my combat sports, you know, hobby and all that. Like people get stuff, you do not mess with that. I mean, I never got it, thankfully, but yeah, it just like creates holes in you.
Right. You can get a well, I had an acquaintance that got a scratch, slipped in the swimming pool and abraded their skin, didn't pay any attention to it, got a staph infection, ended up in the hospital, almost lost an arm. So it's very serious.
Yeah,
well, now here's the good news. Eric is a lot better, but he can't travel. So, you know, he's not going to be there. So we've lost two of probably the 5 outstanding people that we look for each year at the conference.
Oh, man.
David has passed on, and Eric is he'll be home from the hospital, but he can't travel. So, that's really unfortunate. I will get to see Kevin and Rebecca. Kevin, I really believe that Kevin and Rebecca and Dave have made me who I am. Whatever talent I have, and you could probably argue about that, okay? But whatever talent I have as a writer was developed mainly by David Farland, but Kevin Anderson was the guy that introduced me to David and said, I think David can help you. So I owe a lot to those folks, and this conference is truly amazing. We'll have about 250 writers, some of which are novices, never published a thing. Others, like me, have published any number of novels, but we know we can always get better in terms of how we run our business and how we try to be successful in the business. Mm-hmm. So I'm telling you, I'm really fired up about next week.
I find, I barely started Shadow Warriors, which, it's young adult. If I had found an adult book of yours on Audible, I would probably have gone for that. I normally don't read young adult. Even when I was more at the age of it, I guess, I still gravitated towards more adult fiction. But what I did like of what little I've heard so far on the book on Audible is how efficient you are with the time given to characters. And what I mean by that is, the first, I now forgot his first name, but the first kid who has troubles with his dad, not Carl.
That's my favorite line I ever wrote. Not even 8 p.m. and Dad already drunk. That's the first.
Yeah, that was yes. And that moment.
I tried to not spend too much time on any of them.
Which is interesting.
I give them equal time. Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, but what I find is that in very little time, I think there's. I always like to say, even in conversation, people think that someone using a lot of big words and speaking for a long time, that means intelligence. Whereas I think that intelligence in many ways can be someone who's able to grab a lot of information, make it concise and understandable by everyone, if at all possible, And so, and also in character moments, like in my fiction, what I realize is that I like character moments. I like them a lot, but I don't like them stretched out in an empty way. So what I mean is, if you have a half hour that's packed of important character moments, or a half hour reading or watching a movie or whatever, I'll be hooked. I'll be hooked if it's good, like I don't need to see the action right away or whatever. But if it's just someone like not using that time correctly, you're just wasting your time. Like you don't feel like you're getting what you should be getting. And then someone else more efficient can grab like a 20-minute episode of a show and do that same work that it took the half hour to someone else, and they might do it in like 8 minutes. So what I found is, and again, I'm not very far into your book. I don't want to pretend that I'm so far into it, But what I really like about that first character, and I was starting the second character, and I kind of run out of time for our interview. I'm a procrastinator sometimes, but again, I was getting the same sense of efficiency because now it was a girl, and she was kind of talking about her mom, I think, and she mentions her aunt, and I was realizing how you have this. You're very good at conveying information quickly, but also that's in a way that's very easy to remember for the story. Like these details, I'm not gonna forget later, if you will. Whereas, so I don't know. It's a compliment I want to give you for what little I've been into your story. Time-wise, not that I haven't been into it, but what little time I spent with your story, I already found that you have a gift for conveying good character moments in little time, and that's a gift.
By the way, Kevin was one of the people that pointed out to me that you have vignettes about characters, but he doesn't think any chapter should ever be more than about 4 or 5 pages. And you notice I changed, even though it's told in third person, the viewpoint is of the character that chapter is about, right?
Oh, interesting.
And so the thing that he told me was you know, you don't want to have a 14-page chapter in a young adult book. You know, you want to be concise. So maybe some of that conciseness you saw is me paying attention to Kevin. Okay.
And again, I can easily grab a book and spend 10 pages just giving me details of something if it's still giving me information that is enjoyable to read. But what I mean is I hate padding for its own sake. It's kind of when I, as a reader, as a viewer of things, when something feels padded, that's when I kind of check out a little bit, you know? And it's hard to describe because I can really be interested in like something that's just world building and it might seem very unimportant, but it's just written in a way that makes it interesting. So it's hard to explain, you know, but if you can convey the information in a certain way that is efficient, I'll always gravitate toward that, you know. Yeah, maybe as you said, is the nature of the young adult novels as well. But I want to ask you, like, when you write young adult or adult, is it just the rating of the content that changes, or do you have a writing style that changes with it?
I do think that style of my adult novels is a little bit different. For instance, this is a kind of a trivial example, but for instance, in the young adult novels, I rarely use any profanity at all. Yeah, you know, and things are much more declarative. In the world of the teenager, there are not a lot of grays. They're mostly blacks and whites. Now, in some of my adult novels, you'll see that there is a lot more black and white. There's a lot less black and white and a lot more gray because adults live in a much more, our worlds are tinted much more gradually between white and black, and therefore we adults are sensitive to a lot of nuances that don't make a lot of sense to teenagers.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that what I find actually is kind of interesting you're saying that, because I find that lately, and I guess I'm starting to transition, you know, like I'm almost 40, so it's not old yet, but it's also kind of like, well, is it middle age? I don't know anymore what's middle age or not. But what I find is these days, people have more and more trouble with the gray, right? They cannot really accept that the world is not black and white. And I wonder when that shift happened, because it seems to me like being an adult back in the day when I was a kid was also accepting that the world was complex. And you're saying that, and maybe I'm taking a topic a little bit on the side, but yeah, I do wonder about that. I do wonder, like, that you said younger people have an easier time with black and white, and adults accept more gray. And I do wonder if there's this generational shift where the gray is kind of like getting pushed out to later and later, you know, for people to understand.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that bothers me in our political spectrum today is that there seem to be a lot of people on the far sides.
Yes.
Like, for instance, I'm pretty conservative, particularly I'm conservative fiscally. But my attitude about liberals has always been that liberals need conservatives and conservatives need liberals. Conservatives need liberals because we need to be reminded that in this world, we need to have compassion for our fellow man, and we need to have a society in which everyone has access to some opportunities at least.
Yes.
Liberals need conservatives, on the other hand, to remind them that the billfold does not have an infinite dollar source. That, you know, we cannot do everything for everybody. There's just no way to do that. And so that what we have to do is we have to, and you know, some of the great liberals and conservatives in our history politically often got along very well and were able to get stuff done because they were willing to admit that, from my point of view, I don't see this the way the other guy does over there, but we both have valid points, and what we need to do is to find compromises that make sense to both of us. And I think we're seeing less and less of that.
Oh yeah, because they don't represent the people anymore; they represent their side. So
Their
it's
side, exactly.
tribalism. Yeah, it's and that's a problem because a politician should all, in theory, but should always be thinking of the whole of the population. No matter who voted for you. That's
Right.
not what's happening right now at all.
And I think a lot of times, if you have too much of this, what people are reduced to is fighting for wins instead of saying, what, since I'm representing some portion of the American people, what would be the best thing for all my constituents and my counterparts' constituents that we can do given the resources that we have. And if you do that, I think that the people who are being represented end up being the winners instead of these people that are sniping on both sides and they feel like they won because somehow or over they embarrassed the other side or the other side lost something. And I think that's sad.
And I think the normal person online will be called in a given week, a normal person who gives their opinion online will be called both a fascist and a communist in the same week. Because to one extreme, anything different from their extreme is the other extreme.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a problem. That's a problem in our society right now.
And I don't know. It just makes me sad. I just seem to remember a time when some of the let me give you a good example. When I was a young man, I voted proudly for conservative Democrats because they had my point of view. I thought they were
how crazy. Sorry, how crazy is that to hear? Conservative Democrats.
Conservative Democrats. There aren't any.
How crazy is that to hear?
There are right-wing Republicans and left-wing Democrats, and the middle is not very heavily populated at all.
There's nothing in the middle.
And I think it's really sad because I think I remember politicians, I'll call them leaders, okay, leaders on both sides of the aisle that would get together and figure out what's the best. Now, I'll give you a good example of that, and this may shock you. He had a lot of faults as a president, but I think, and speaking from a conservative point of view, because I am fiscally conservative, I think John Kennedy was an extraordinarily great president in many respects. He had a feel for what America needed. And if he hadn't been cut down by this idiot that had lived in Russia and ended up here in Dallas, for God's sake, so that we had that stain on Dallas when we didn't deserve it because it was this nutcase who came via Louisiana from Russia, where he'd gone and stayed for several years. If he hadn't been cut down, I think Kennedy would probably have been one of the great presidents. And Kennedy certainly didn't share a lot of my political views, but he understood what was right for the people. And I think he started the Peace Corps. I think the Peace Corps was an extraordinary achievement because it was a way for people to serve the country and not be in the Army. And I think that's pretty amazing. So I ended up not, when I was younger, I didn't hold him in such high regard, but as I've gotten older, I've decided that Kennedy was a pretty darn good president. Okay, I'll tell you another president who was really good that is one of my favorite all-time presidents. Once again, remember I'm a conservative. Okay. It's Harry Truman. Now Harry Truman was president an awful long time ago. Okay, but
yeah, I'm not very familiar. I mean, I know that he is, but I'm not familiar with his.
But if you read about
highlights,
and I've had to read about him because I didn't have any personal. But if you read about Truman, if you read about Kennedy, if you read about some of these presidents that have been good leaders, they all have these things in common. I think Reagan was a good president too. I think Reagan had a feel for what the country wanted. Have all these presidents had problems? Yeah. But I think all of them had many good leadership qualities. Okay, I don't think the last few presidents inspire me quite as much. But
Trump and
you know,
Biden, I don't
I
feel
don't
any.
criticize any president because I didn't vote for Biden, but I'll tell you something. President Biden's got a lot of problems on his plate, and I, you know, and I would not like to be in his shoes, frankly. I am so glad I'm not the president.
But that's interesting the way you put it, because you say I didn't vote for him, but you acknowledge the problems he has in his hands. And what I realize is that both during the Trump era and the Biden era, and I'm looking at this as a point of view as a half Spanish, half French Canadian guy in Canada, right? But but it seems, and I'm looking at that, and it seems to me like what's really messed up is this kind of like attitude of I'm gonna sink the boat to take you with me, and that both sides have, and it's like, and now I'm gonna be transparent. I'm not a fan of Trump at all. But what I found really weird is when Trump was in power, and now you flip the script for Biden, is that each side that wasn't in power at that moment seems like almost like happy to see things go bad. And I'm like, you're in the same boat. And I understand how each side has their grievances and each side has their point of view of the world, but you do not understand how you're the same. You're the same system. Like
Right. Exactly.
you're the same. We're like you're the organisms of the same system, and it's like you watch each side like just like joyously go like, oh, look how that guy messed up just now. And I'm like, you're on the same boat. you're self-destructing.
I really don't get that, and that's what I referred to a little while ago. I think it's just sad that there's nobody willing to reach out anymore. Nobody. I remember. I believe he was a Republican a long time ago when I was young. Everett Dirksen was a.
Doesn't ring a bell. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But I'm listening.
Yeah, but Dirksen was a tremendous politician, and everybody liked him, and everybody worked with him, and that's because he was always willing to compromise and to do what he felt like was right for the country.
These days, it's not acceptable to compromise.
Yeah,
these days, if you compromise, you're the enemy.
Yeah,
you're the enemy if you compromise. Like if.
And hey, the way I feel about it, I'm just going to do the best I can, and I try not to. Well, to give you a good example, now I said I was a churchgoer, but the point to me of a church is not that you go into a sanctuary and you sing happy songs, and you hear a bunch of baloney from the preacher. Our church does we have a partnership with some other organizations. There's an area here in Dallas. It's about 4 square miles. And in this 4 square miles, there are 62 languages spoken. Okay. And most of the people are desperately poor in this area. And our church goes into that area, and we are constantly pouring not just money, but clothing and food and bottled water and stuff like that. And to me, I don't care whether you do it in church or you have a community organization or whatever the heck, but if you're not doing something like that, then you don't have a right to complain about how bad things are. Okay.
That's a good point, because I think these days, like, a lot of people feel like they're heroes just for giving their opinion on social media. Oh, I didn't like what that person said. But then it's like, okay, just take a step back. And what I find interesting is, okay, maybe this person has an opinion I don't like about this one thing. And maybe it even really offends me a lot. But at the same time, if I see them do some good, actual concrete good, like in that moment, what I find is that I'm actually going to respect that person more, because in their actions, they're actually doing something. Whereas this other person typing away, maybe I agree with them overall politically. I agree with them more. Maybe I have more of an inclination to agree with their morals and their principles. But then again, if they're not doing crap and they're just typing away and being offended by this person or that person, it's kind of like, well, you're not doing anything really. At least the other person, maybe they said something that I think is dumb, but if they're also doing this, so and I'm gonna give kind of a weird example, but this is theoretical. I'm not talking about any people I know, but let's say this person who has all of the opinions I agree with of not being bigoted and all that, and this person just agrees with me and all these things. And then maybe there's a fireman who has an opinion about a group of people that I don't like. They're not hateful. They don't go after them. They just have this bad opinion that offends me. And I'm like, you can't be saying and thinking that of those people, whoever they may be. And the fireman's like, well, that's what I think. That's it. And of course, at first glance, I'm inclined to like more the other person who's like me, who doesn't have any prejudice, But then there's a fire in the building. And that person I completely agreed with just like flees out, grabs their bag, gets out of the building right away. And that fireman had opinions I didn't agree with, goes into the fire and pulls out like someone for that group of people because that was his job and it didn't matter. That's his job to save lives. Now, it's a theoretical example, but I could seek out like actual examples. I don't want to because I want people to nitpick the message I'm trying to convey here. But
right.
Then if you take a step back, who's actually doing more good for society? And this is a philosophical debate. You can, of course, debate it. You can debate that this or that, like what's important is what you communicate with other people. What's important is what you people can debate it, but I think it's an important question. And I think it also says that people don't lose all of their intrinsic value just because of their one character flaw. Like, again, I'm saying with the condition that person is not hateful, not going directly after people. And so I also think sometimes and it happens to me too. Sometimes like I see something, I get angry, and then I take a step back and I'm like, maybe I'm still angry after the fact. Maybe I'm not, or maybe I think, well, okay, this is bad, but this or that. I think also like you have to take into account like what people's lives were. Like if someone fled a fascist regime, they might lean really hard on the left. If someone fled a communist regime, they might lean really hard on the right. So you have to also take into account people's life experiences. And I feel like right now it's this world where people just want to take their side and see everyone else as the enemy, which sometimes they are. You also have to acknowledge when there's an enemy, like someone who's really hateful and really hurtful. But yeah, I don't know. You can't really. I don't like the idea of canceling a whole human being over one point.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. But that's what people expect of their leaders as well. I think this is my long way of saying that. I think what happens is, if they see their leader shaking hands with the other leader, then they go like, oh well, see, if you're shaking hands with that person, it means you also agree with them on everything they said, which is insane. It's not a way to live life, but that's where we
are. What I think is funny is that some of these right-leaning and left-leaning people, pardon me, in private are actually pretty good friends. I know I heard an interview with a senator, and he was talking about one of his good friends. Now, this senator being interviewed was pretty conservative, and he was talking about a liberal senator and very affectionately saying, "Yeah, we can get things done." He said, "This guy, he's a good friend. We disagree, but we're always willing to work together." I wish we heard more of that.
Oh yeah, you bet. That would be nice, huh? I think it's a pendulum. As long as it don't swing too far to a point of breaking a society, I think it swings back. What I find interesting is that as I was born in '82, so I remember the '80s and '90s, and conservatives and the right were the more censorious ones back then. And now these days is the left is the more censorious one, which is kind of like interesting because that's a shift I never thought I'd see. But is censorious a word? Like when people want to censor a lot? Well, anyway, but yeah, it's.
I'll tell you one thing that does concern me a little bit, and that is that some of these organizations on the internet like Facebook. As a conservative, it seems to me that they sure lean towards censoring conservatives and not censoring liberals. Now, maybe I'm mistaken, but it seems I worry, and I may be wrong, but I worry that a Facebook or a Twitter, or I guess you saw there's been a big uproar about the GoFundMe.
Yeah.
And that kind of concerns me, because if you get these internet organizations having a point of view, that really concerns me. I think the great thing about the internet in general is that, people can come on and say whatever they want. Now, I think that leads to abuses. I've seen some abusive behavior.
Of course, yeah.
But I think it's good to have the ability for people to come and say what they think. So I don't know. All I can say is that in the future, I hope I see more hands reaching across the aisle.
Yeah.
Because I think don't you think it's more a political thing than an everyday person thing? I don't think people out in the real world are nearly so concerned about their friends' political points of view, even if they're different.
Well, no, they might be. Because they've been trained to be by, they've been taught to be. Yeah, but the GoFundMe, I'm going to admit that for me, it's kind of, I live in Ottawa. So for me, I'm very biased in this issue, where before the whole protest happened, I'm for free speech. I think protests are important, but the way that they're taking place, I don't want to get too much into it, but I'm not agreeing to how it's happening, because the citizens of downtown, it's basically sleep deprivation. It's not the politicians who are suffering, it's the citizens there. And the way it's being done, some of them are being tackled to the floor for wearing, like workers are being tackled to the floor for wearing a mask. And that, to me, you've loved. That's not the point you were supposed to make. It's not a piece. What I mean to say is, I'm not against the fact that people wanted the voices heard, but the way they're doing it is not peaceful. And I wanna say so. Because of that, the whole GoFundMe thing, I'm biased, and I'm gonna admit as much.
You're in Ottawa.
And I'm angry. I'm angry about it. And at first, I wasn't. I wasn't angry about it at first. I wasn't like ready to hate on the people arriving. I was like, well, it's free speech is important. But the way that is happening.
Is this mask thing a big deal up in Canada?
Well, when it comes to the mandates and all that, I'm a bit of a centrist. I like to joke about that, because there's things where I think that should be looser, but there's things where I think that out of respect for people who are more vulnerable, we could take into account. So I find myself not really agreeing with either side who's like all for it, or like, there's the side of we should take everything should be closed forever. And then there's the side of, well, we should just ignore the virus. And I'm kind of like in the middle of it, because I want to take into account people who are vulnerable. I don't think I would be that badly affected by it, but I want to take into account other people. So because of that, I'm kind of like in between when it comes to those arguments. And they're important arguments to be had. And we're a society where free speech is important, so let's have them. And, but however, the way it's happening, what's happening right now is not what other people are presenting. Other people are presenting it as a peaceful protest. It's not peaceful. They're not doing it in a peaceful way, because just the honking of those trucks at every hour of the night, the citizens are paying the price for it. Like them honking is not affecting the politicians any more or less. But those trucks have really loud horns. Now I live outside, thankfully, but there's people who are being sleep deprived. There's people who can't live their lives anymore. They also, if you're going to do a protest, and you know what, people are going to try to whataboutisms. Like, look, it applies to any protest you want to pick out. I will respect a protest that will part for an ambulance. I will not respect a protest that does not part for an ambulance, because people have died already. So health workers have to go to the hospital in disguise. They can't be seen as health workers because they might be harassed or attacked. So because of all these things, I will not call it a peaceful protest. Now, I want to be clear on this. I do want people to express themselves. I just don't like the way it's being done.
Yeah, and I don't know much about that. You're talking about that trucker protest, and I see down here in the States, we don't.
Oh, I thought you were referring to that because of the GoFundMe.
No, I wasn't.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay.
The GoFundMe, I was referring to some. Oh, that's right. Okay. There has been a GoFundMe issue there too.
I haven't looked into it yet. I don't know the details, but I want to be clear that I'm biased right now. You know,
Well, I don't know that much about that protest, but I do say that it's really fun. I'm very conservative about some things and not so conservative about others. Like, for instance, I don't see anything wrong with telling people you have to get vaccinated. Let me tell you, when I was a kid here in this town,
yeah,
you had to have a smallpox vaccination or you couldn't go to school. It was that simple.
How quickly people forget, huh?
Yeah, and people forget that. And nobody thought anything about it. People just went and got their smallpox vaccination. And so, to me, if they were to say, hey, if you want to work in gainful employment, or you want your child to go to school, you will get your vaccinations. I wouldn't have any problem with that. Now, my wife is more right-leaning than I am. She thinks that's terrible.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, you're doing by getting a vaccination. It's not just all about you.
Yeah, there you go.
And so that's the thing.
And I've been really disappointed by the martial arts community. I like MMA and all that, and a lot of them, you always see like martial artists as these people who, if they saw a bad guy, they would stop them from harming the weaker, right? But it turns out that a lot of them treat it like it's a challenger, like I'm not scared of it, and it's like, yeah, but it's not about you. It's not just about you, like.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of, I won't say funny because it wasn't funny, but I thought it was ironic that here a few weeks ago, one of these guys that had railed against vaccinations and said they were, all these bad things about them, and then he got COVID and died. So I guess he made his bed and he got to lay in it, but it seems like, and I have heard some bad things that occasionally the vaccine can cause problems for people that take it. But if you look at the total number of problems caused by the vaccine, I think it's just minuscule. And to me, nobody complained about smallpox vaccine. We just thought,
I see it as a calculated risk because I understand some people are concerned about how quickly it came out. But to me, it's like, I look at it this way. First of all, it's also about protecting others, not just about me. Second, it's this thing at least was designed with the intention to protect. The virus mutates and is not its nature. It's not designed to protect or anything. So it's kind of like you have to make a calculated risk, right? And that's why I'm for it. Now, again, I want to be clear. If people want to have debates about that, that's what free speech is about. It's just, I want to be clear. It's the way that's happening that I don't like. But I agree with you.
I think you ought to be very careful, about giving people their choices. For instance, I have one of my stepsons who is a dear. I love him like my own children. But early in the process, they got COVID before we even had vaccines.
Yeah.
And so he's refused to get a shot. He says, I don't need it. And I can see his point of view. He had the COVID, he got tested, he had the antibodies that he's
that's one thing where I'm more of a centrist. If someone already has the antibodies, anyway.
Yeah, and so I don't have any problem with that. But well, look, what it all boils down to is that I like to look at myself as a storyteller. And I'd like to think that if I can kind of sum this all up, I think that I'd like to believe that my stories bridge the gap between the various political and other types of opinions in this world. I sort of look at myself sometimes like this old, wizened storyteller among the cavemen who sat by the fire at night and spun tales for the children to entertain them, or for the adults as well. And that's like what I think I do. I know that some people write, I was reading an article the other day about Stanislav Lim, who I'm sure you've heard of, very famous writer from, I think he came from Poland, but a famous science fiction writer.
What did he write?
He wrote a bunch of, I can't recall any of his stuff right now, but he wrote a bunch of very harsh stories that kind of chronicled what was going on in Russia and the satellite countries back in the day.
Okay.
And I admire him for that, and I esteem him for that. but that's not me. I'm a storyteller and I'm an entertainer. And I like to think that I spin tales that take the reader out of this world for a while into a new world where they can learn and be amazed. And that to me is what I think my calling is. I'd certainly, those writers that have a political axe to grind, or maybe well, like for instance, what's his name that wrote he wrote the book in the 1930s about showing about all the meat processing plants, how terrible they were. What was his Upton Sinclair? He was trying to make a point about a terrible condition in this country, and I can, I've read some of I read that book. As a matter of fact, I can't remember the name of it, but nevertheless, I think it was a great book, and I admire him for that. But that's not me. I am the entertainer. I am the tale spinner, and I want to entertain people, and I want them to read my books to take them out of our world to another world for a little while, for relaxation and so forth. And that's how I see myself. I don't see myself as a muckraker or a conscience.
But see, here's the thing, Nathan. Now, to the conservatives will probably say that because you included a transgender character in one of your stories, that you went woke. Like that's what they say. But to me, it's funny because transgender people exist. So to include them in stories is not a political statement in itself. But apparently, for a lot of people, just to do so is a political statement. Well, so I don't think it is. But
you may be right, but in this case, I did it in honor of some people I know, and it's not meant to be any kind of a statement other than to acknowledge the road they have to travel and the fact that it's a difficult road.
And I think it's important to tell those stories. I really think so, and and yeah, you're mentioning earlier the sensitivity reader, and to me that's a very important job, because the sensitivity reader, when you have a good one, I think is also someone who might at times just go like, this chapter is fine, everything is fine here. Maybe later they have something to say, but there's people. The thing is that sometimes if your job is to find problems, you're getting paid for that. So sometimes what happens is maybe some people will be more inclined to like, not look, is there a problem, but more, let's find a problem. There's two attitudes, and it's like buses are the same. Like a bus can be like.
By the way, that's one of the reasons that I was so taken by Toby, and I'm really looking forward to meeting Toby next week, because the job that Toby did was just a flat, okay, you've chosen a transgender character, now here's the good stuff you did, here's something you might want to think about. And there was no political agenda, there was no well, you paid me, so I'm going to earn my pay by like
exactly. And it's a delicate thing to bring. I even feel, I almost didn't bring it up, and I bring it up much later. But see how it is these days, where I'm almost afraid of mentioning it, because then people might say, "Oh, you're against good representation," and I'm not. I'm just bringing it up like.
To me, a sensitivity reader is just like an editor, except they're editing for a very specific viewpoint. And he gave me pretty. Now, did he find a lot of corrections to make? Yes, but he generally gave me pretty high grades and said, "Look, you're on the right track. I'm just tweaking. All I'm doing is tweaking."
Yeah, it wasn't like add this message as well to your story that I want you to add, or it wasn't like that. Yeah,
there was none of that at all. So
so that's good. Yeah, another worry I have is, and no, again, I'm just like addressing things that are happening because this is new. A sensitivity reader. I mean, I don't know if it's new, but it's new that it's so mainstream. I mean, one thing that I find also my worry a little bit is that maybe writers with less money to spend, like writers who don't have money for a sensitive reader, I have this fear that they might shy away from writing stuff that is not them out of fear of getting it wrong, because it's like damned if you do, damned if you don't. Like, and a writer should aspire to write many types of human beings, like many points of views and many different characters. That's what writers should do. But sometimes I wonder, like, is it going to be like a starting writer who doesn't have a little money? Like, do they try to include characters that are very different from them, and then like, oh, if I don't pay sensitive a reader, maybe I'll be like, you know, them if they don't do it, oh, you didn't include any diversity, you know. So I think it brings up interesting conversations in writing where it has changed so much that these are conversations that are important to be had. Like maybe I don't know if there's organizations that exist where they offer them maybe to writers with less money, or maybe that's not a thing yet. But I think it's a good idea to. I think it's a good profession, but I can understand how some writers who are starting out with less money are worried about that. And maybe publishing houses could have their own in-house sensitive readers. I don't know if that's what happened with Warfire, but because you said that he was hired, right?
Well, I think that's exactly what they did. They wanted to have some of that expertise in-house. And frankly, after dealing with Toby, I think Kevin made a great decision, okay?
That's good.
I would also say that you'll have to pardon me. I've had a sinus infection, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to give up talking here pretty quick because I'm
we're running out.
I know we're about through, but I'm running out of voice. It's really funny. I sing in our church choir. I'm a big fan of all kinds of classical music, including classical church music. And I have missed about 6 Sundays and 6 choir practices just because I've been fighting a sinus infection, and I'm over it now. But you know how when you have any kind of nasal infection, then you cough for another 2 months after you get through with it, right? And that's what I'm dealing with right now.
If you can go next week still, you can always blame me. It's Bruno. He made me talk so much. I thought I was going to be there 15 minutes, and he held me on for longer than an hour.
Yeah. Well, and that's why you said it would be about an hour, but I'm going to have to get. I'm going to have to. I'm just running out of voice. But is there anything else that I could tell you with respect to what I do? I think I've pretty well covered it.
To be honest, I could have talked to you for hours. And you know, like you even, I'll breach upon it very quickly. You even brought up the fact that, you know, it was interesting because I never thought of that. But you brought up the idea that you write in third person, but you stay from a character's perspective. And it's kind of funny how I'm sure I've read plenty of stories where that's the case, where it's not like you have like all these points of view from different characters, but I only notice it, for example, Michael Stackpole, who wrote a Star Wars novel, I, Jedi, and the whole novel is like in the first person, you know? Yeah. And then, of course, you notice it in that moment. It's so obvious. But then you have in the third person, you just made me realize for the first time ever that there's going to be stories that are like different points of views in the same chapter. And then, as you said, there's stories that are actually, even though they're written in the third person, it's one point of view. And I just wanted to point out that what you said kind of sparked a little something in my head, and it came back on stories and not being sure which one it was. You know?
Yeah, and I do have a lot of different points of view in the Shadow Warrior stories because there's 5 characters, right? I'm a little uneasy when I write the girl characters, even though it's in third person, because I'm not a girl. And there's one point in one of the character that is called Letty. I don't know if you've gotten to her.
Oh yeah, I was starting her story when I had to.
Letty is black, but she's a very attractive young lady. And at one point later in the first book, it might even be in the second book, but Letty's a real strong character, and she's a real take charge person. She's not a shrinking violet, okay, but she's talking to, I think, Cal, and she tells Cal.
Cal, that was the name. I said Carl. Yeah, I was Cal. Yeah.
And she tells Cal, she says, I know you guys expect me to do this and that and other, but she says, for gosh sakes, I'm a girl. Sometimes I just like to put on some eye makeup and a nice dress and go out and wiggle my butt and hope somebody notices me, you know. And I did that because I wanted to show that although she's very mannish in her behavior, she's still a girl. Yeah. But I don't do too much of that because I'm a guy, and so I hardly ever, except in Shadow Warriors, I've never written from a female point of view. I've seen male male writers that can do that very well, but maybe I can if I ever try it, in a female character, but I'd be very nervous about that. Okay.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's interesting that female writers can feel very comfortable. Yeah, and I'm gonna let you go some too, but just kind of as this thought that you gave me, that female writers seem very comfortable writing men and women, and men, we have trouble. I guess it's something about men in general. I don't know, but where we have more trouble imagining the other side, in that way.
Yeah, and whatever you say about writing as first person, third person, or whatever, there's always people that violate all these conventions that we have about writing.
Of course.
Have you ever read anything by Nora Roberts?
No, Nora Roberts? No, I haven't.
She wrote a bunch of detective novels under the name J.D. Robb. I don't know if you've read those.
What fictional characters, are there any that stood out?
Well, her J.D. Robb character, J.D. Robb novels all are about this detective lieutenant woman named Eve Dallas. And the point I'm trying to make is that Nora Roberts, whether she's writing under J.D. Robb or under her own name, she violates every rule of writing. She changes viewpoints in the middle of a chapter, which is considered a heinous crime by most writers. And she gets away with it. And she sold probably 150 million books.
But movies do that all the time. Movies do that all the time.
Yeah, and so, I think in terms of writing from a point of view or not from a point of view, I think if you're a good enough writer, you can get away with anything, okay?
Because at least make it convincing.
I actually like it. I've read some of her romances too, and I love her writing. I think she writes very interesting books. But that just shows that if you've got what it takes, you can break a lot of rules and still get away with it.
That's you know what? I think that's the perfect note to end on. So Nathan, look, thank you very much for your time. And is there where can people find you online? Do you have any social media or?
They can go to Amazon. I have an author page, Nathan B. Dodge, and all my books there. And I now have I've sold 14, and 12 of them are actually published now. And so you can go to Amazon and go to my site, and you'll see all 12 of those books if anybody's interested in any of them. And like I say, if they are from Wordfire Press, they're young adult. If they're from Ring of Fire Press, they're adult. Okay.
And your Shadow Warriors, at least the first ones, are on Audible as well, because that's where I grabbed the first one. Yeah.
The first 3 Shadow Warriors books are now on Audible. We're trying to get them all on Audible, but the pandemic has really put a real crick in that,
Yeah, recording studios and such. Well, Nathan, thank you very much for coming to my show.
Bruno, thank you very much. You're extremely personable. I've had the best time talking to you, and I hope that maybe one of these days you can make it to Superstars, and I can get to meet you in person. I think that we'd have a good time going out to dinner and talking about things. Okay.
That'd be lovely.
All right. You take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.